Hello and welcome to the next webinar in our how-to series brought to you by Strengthening the Heartland. My name is Amber Letcher and I'm really excited to see so many of you here with us today on this really sunny day, at least in the Dakotas. So welcome from wherever you are attending. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a couple announcements for you. First of all, if you'd like to follow along with the presentation, we do have the handout linked in the handout section. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to type those into your questions box. We'll typically go through those at the end of the presentation and I'll relay them to our speaker. And then finally, we do ask that you take a couple minutes to fill out a short survey for us at the end. You'll see that linked in the chat box. This survey helps us with feedback, and also we really appreciate your recommendations for future topics for our webinar series. So with that, I will introduce our speaker for today. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Ron Bolden. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling and Learning Sciences at West Virginia University in Morgantown. His scholarship primarily focuses on school counseling and counseling children and adolescents. And before assuming his current role, he was a middle school counselor in Virginia. He enjoys presenting on issues impacting students, school counselors, and school communities. So welcome, Ron. We're really excited to have you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amber. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're at. I'm really excited to be here to talk about a topic that perhaps isn't the most exciting initially to educators and counselors, etc. But my hope is that you'll understand its utility across, regardless of your role with working with children, and then leave with some simple strategies, some techniques, really simple ways you could implement some of this stuff tomorrow or even today, depending on what time it is where you're at. So our topic for today, as described in the advertising and everything, is assessing youth learning outcomes and engagement. So how do we know that our kids are different, hopefully for the better, as a result of our interventions? What are some easy, simple ways that we can use data or use information to inform our next steps, to inform areas for improvement possibly? So we'll kind of discuss all of those avenues and more during our time together this morning/afternoon. So a little bit about me. Like Amber said, I am Dr. Ron Bolden. I'm an assistant professor in the counseling program at West Virginia University. So a fellow land grant institution as well. So very excited to be partnering with the fellow LGI, if you will. This is, I guess now I'm starting my second year as an assistant professor here. And like Amber said, beforehand, I was a school counselor at the middle school level. Was not by force, it was by choice. I'm a very proud MIDI, if you will. I was the sixth grade counselor. I had all of sixth grade and the first half of seventh grade, but I really enjoyed what I did and really enjoyed using data and using assessment information to inform my interventions and to inform how I would support our students. So one of my research areas or concentrations, if you will, is on testing and assessment. And as a matter of fact, I just wrapped up a summer course with our master's students here at WVU focused just on testing and assessment. And I remember you can probably imagine that the excitement level to take an assessment course over the summer wasn't exactly at a volcano eruption level, but 6 weeks later, since it was a pretty abridged class, they all talked about how I unpacked it and gave examples, helped to make the connection between these topics a bit and what they'll do in clinical and school settings a bit clearer. So I enjoy discussing a topic that for some people maybe can induce anxiety, but a way to simplify it and to make the application a bit clearer. So my focus, like Amber also said, is on school counseling. So I teach pretty exclusively in our school counseling program. So assisting our first year students with kind of understanding the profession and what school counselors do, or educators do, and how do school counselors fit within the world of a school system. And then with our second years who are getting ready to graduate, assisting them in their internship and understanding these really complex situations and preparing them for the world of work and putting on their superhero capes and to really make a world of a difference in the lives of our students and school communities. So it's really fulfilling work. And I also, like I'm doing now, I get professional development on a number of topics, including ways that educators, which include school counselors, school-based counselors, human services personnel, and really anyone who works with youth, ways to understand or better ascertain, are my students getting it? Am I clear? Do we need to kind of adjust my instructional tactics? So really finding out ways to gauge engagement and gauge how much students are actually getting out of your lesson, out of your intervention, out of your initiative, so that you're not kind of spinning your wheels for nothing. So that long-winded spiel, I hope kind of gave you some idea as far as who I am, my background, and why I'm here in front of you all virtually today. So here's kind of a brief roadmap, and I think that the registration kind of site kind of contains some objectives on the site, but it'll be a bit of a paraphrase. So by the end of today, I would like for you all to understand what assessment is and how it can be utilized when working with children. Also understanding a couple of vocabulary words. There's just two that I'm going to focus on that I think really get to the heart of what we intend or set out to do when we're trying to assess student learning and student growth. And then some strategies that individuals working with youth can employ to assess learning and engagement. And so those strategies will be rooted in the two vocabulary words that we'll discuss. So what are some different type of assessments we can administer, and what are some ways we can do them that are fun? Not that, well, to me as a nerd, I find all assessments quite intriguing, but to a kid, how can we maybe present them in a way that's a bit kind of kid-centric, if you will? All right, so let's talk a bit about this assessment idea. So often there's kind of this, like I said, when I've wrapped up teaching a 6-week assessment course to our master's students. And at the beginning of our time together, this was kind of their impression of what assessment looked like, to use animal format. Just this scary concept. How do I use assessment? It scares the heck out of me. What are these terms and everything? And perhaps some of you have a similar, I guess, sentiment centered around the assessment process. But the goal is to kind of go from this to this, if you will. So yes, it's still a bear. Yes, it's still a lion, but I don't quite feel as intimidated, if you will, as far as being able to administer assessments, being able to assess knowledge and understanding as I'm teaching something or as I'm delivering some sort of content. A little bit of levity in there, but you kind of get the point. So trying to make these topics not as intimidating, if you will. So what is assessment? You know, there's a number of terms. I can give you the definition, like the textbook definition, but simply is how are students or clients different after an intervention, or even when they're started. So we want to be able to assess if our interventions are actually effective, if our techniques, our approaches are helpful, so that we can better assess if learning outcomes are being met. And of course, our school-based partners understand their importance in the school context in terms of our students somehow better in terms of their understanding of topics after our intervention than they were before the intervention, to kind of really show that we're making contributions to students, not just academically, but social, emotional as well, and also centered on career outcomes as well. And so by and large, there's been kind of this push toward quality over quantity, quality over quantity. Certainly this has been a huge thing in schools, but I would imagine that in other contexts that there's kind of been this focus. So at one point in time, like I'll use my school counseling background as an example. There was a period of time when school counselors, they may be asked by their principal. So tell me what impact you made on the students, or tell me like what impact you make on the school. And perhaps they would say, I ran 5 groups, I gave 5 group counseling sessions, I gave 2 individual sessions with students, I gave 5 classroom lessons. And at one point, that was kind of the bar as far as, okay, you know, there was this quantity aspect of I gave 7 lessons or I gave 5 small group counseling sessions. But now the focus is more so on the quality. So no longer is the bar, okay, that's great, you gave 7 lessons. That sounds great. How are the kids different? You know, you just ate up an hour of what could have been instructional time. I need to have some data, either preliminary or kind of final, that demonstrates some sort of change, even if it's marginal, but some change or enhanced knowledge by our students. So hence the quality over quantity. So a lot of agencies are kind of focused more on, you know, it's one thing to, of course, put like, I ran 5 groups. We had 7 field trips to this location. We went to 5 different colleges. But having some data to show, do students know more about college? Are students a little more excited about possible career or college opportunities? Do they see themselves possibly going to college? Those sorts of questions to really kind of reinforce that we actually are making some inroads in terms of student knowledge and student improvement. Oops. Yeah. And the same thing here. So like maybe you're working for, let's say, an after school program, like you're an after school program coordinator. I'm sure that there is some requirement to note like how many students were there, how many group leaders were there, how many groups did you administer, how many trips did you take, probably some grant requirements to notate those quantitative aspects. I really want to see that we're making an impact on the kids in terms, whatever the goal was or is for that intervention. Are kids learning something? Or are those goals being met? And if not, what adjustments should be made to kind of move the needle closer toward meeting those objectives? So again, no more is it we have what looks to be somewhere around 50 kids in our after school program, but here's how we're making a difference. Here's how we've collected data, we've used different assessment metrics to better, I guess, make concrete the improvement we're making with students. And obviously we know that growth is not a linear progress or process. You're going to have days that things don't go as planned, but you continue to forge ahead and continue to make modifications to best support our students. So given I've kind of been hammering this home over the past 13 minutes, but given the fact that there's been this push toward really showing that we're making inroads or making improvements rooted in the purpose of our interventions, we need to be able to demonstrate our true impact. And there's a huge kind of advocacy push, especially in the school counseling world, but I would think that in related disciplines as well, as far as proving our worth, proving that we actually are an integral part of the school community. So finding ways to assess understanding and knowledge is very important. So hopefully I've kind of set the groundwork as far as what assessment is kind of in the school context or in the youth context, why it's important to focus more on quality over quantity. Not that we don't dismiss quantity, but it's kind of understanding that there's more than just I ran 5 different groups, for example, and then understanding how that relates to professional advocacy and showing that we're actually making some inroads as far as having an impact on our students, be it in an after school program, or be it as a school counselor or a school-based therapist, or a human services personnel, for example. So I promise I wasn't going to kind of bore you with the 10,000 different assessment terms. So for our time together, we're going to focus on 2 terms. And if you kind of understand these terms, this will get you really far. So we have our summative assessments, and then we have our formative assessments. And so the biggest difference is one occurs throughout, so kind of like checkpoints, if you will, whereas one occurs at the end of an activity or intervention or a lesson. So our summatives are at the end, and our formative are throughout. I mean, you can, memorize those. I think the biggest takeaway is that you want to have assessments at the end, but also have some interspersed as kind of checkpoints to ensure that your students are following along. I mean, if you mix up summative and formative, that isn't really the biggest thing. The most important thing to understand is you want to have a mix of both of those as you're giving a lesson or talking about a certain topic or what have you related to your particular discipline. And I'll kind of give some real world examples as far as why it's important that we do both and not just rely on one of them. And then also some examples of some formative assessments and some summative assessments as well. And these, to kind of clarify, these assessments are to assess our students' understanding where I'm at in terms of what they're supposed to know. Are they grasping these concepts that I'm talking about? And then the summative is more so, did they understand fully the topic, and did any learning occur as a result of the 30 minutes or 45 minutes that I was up here lecturing or that I took to talk about a certain topic. Maybe the topic is internet safety. Maybe the topic is bullying or how to be a good friend, how to communicate appropriately. So having some checkpoints, formative, but also some sort of end assessment to gauge growth and learning, and then using that data to inform your next steps. So let's take a bit of a deeper dive into kind of these ideas of formative and summative assessments. And all this is just all designed to kind of lay the foundation so that when we jump into the examples, you'll kind of have an understanding as far as what formative assessments are and what summative assessments are, and why it's important to have an kind of an end assessment, but also have some interspersed throughout the journey. Think of like, I don't know, a Candyland board, if you will. You have to kind of go through the different components to get to the end, kind of having some checkpoints interspersed throughout. And so this PowerPoint kind of just talks about, some purposes of formative assessments. And this is clearly, as you can see, within the context of the school setting. But for example, if you're maybe a 4-H group leader, or you work with kids in other capacities, I think that this is highly transferable into whatever kind of work and interventions that you provide in your particular realm as well. And so the formatives are ongoing, right? So these are the benchmarks, the checkpoints. Are students following along? Do students kind of understand? And so we have a couple of examples of formative assessments, observations, classroom discussions, and analysis of student work. And some of these I'll kind of highlight when we get to the example slides in a bit. And again, you can use this formative assessment data to adapt your teaching and learning to meet students' needs. So of course, the reason why we get up in front of kids is to help them learn something or help them to grow or to better understand a topic. And if we're not quite meeting the aim that we set out to meet, you don't want to keep spinning your wheels doing the same thing and hoping for a different result. This gives you data kind of real time, if you will, so you can kind of adjust how you're teaching or how you're speaking with the students, maybe go back and clarify something if it seems like a lot of your students, for example, seem to be unsure, or maybe they're not quite on the mark in terms of fully understanding that topic. All right, let's pull some pictures, and hopefully I can kind of better make this concept of formative assessments a bit more concrete. So we have, and maybe this is, I hope this is probably maybe pre-pandemic, I would think, but we have a restaurant, and let's say you go to, I don't know, name your favorite restaurant, and you order, name your favorite food. So let's say it's like a 5-star, kind of like a Hell's Kitchen type of restaurant, if you will. And you order something and they have like these top of the line chefs who are preparing the food and all of that good stuff. So more than likely, when you order something or when you're requesting something, at some point the chef is going to try out kind of, I don't know, the sauce or the I'm not a culinary person, so please forgive me with this, but they're going to try it out a little bit to make sure that by the time it gets to your plate, maybe it's not too salty, it's not too bland. They're going to make sure that their sauce is appropriately, I don't know, concocted so that it tastes good for you. The risk that the chef in the top left-hand corner runs with not doing this formative assessment, trying the food out, would be that you get the food and it's really, really salty. And the reason why it's really, really salty is because you didn't have a formative assessment in there, that being trying it out really quickly to make sure that your food is appropriately seasoned. So that's kind of one, I guess, real world example as far as how important incorporating formative assessments can be in trying to mitigate the likelihood that your students may be off track, if you will. So really you could say that the formative, which is the ongoing one, is when the chef tastes the food. Your summative one, which is the final one, is the bottom left, the bottom right-hand corner, excuse me, where the customers eat the food. You can't, after that point, I guess you could take it back if it was like undercooked, but pretty much that's the final product, and you have your customers, hopefully very happy customers, but very excited to eat their fish and chips, it looks like. Let's explore another kind of example to help to delineate the whole formative assessment, summative assessment idea. So I couldn't find like 3 pictures of like the same people. So kind of just pretend like these are all the same individual. I couldn't find just images that were of the same ones. So let's say that in school, like let's say that you get a teacher gives some sort of, I don't know, assignment in class for a student to do, not graded, but kind of just to gauge their understanding of something. A lot of teachers will kind of roam around the room and like this bottom center image, they'll kind of check in with students. They'll say, they'll take a look at what they have and they'll give some feedback so that by the end of it, they'll be a lot more on track in terms of being able to respond correctly. So we have the top left-hand image is, you know, the student or the teacher, excuse me, gives the assignment, gives the task. The bottom one is the teacher checks in with the student, and then ideally the top right one is the student. They're on track now because the teacher stepped in and gave assistance, and they did a good job, hence the high five, or they did a better job, hence the high five with the teacher and with the student. So if the teacher didn't do the formative assessment, again, that's the benchmark one, where she didn't pop in and check in with the student, I mean, perhaps they would have been fine as is, you know, but perhaps the student could have been way off in terms of their understanding of a topic. And so when you could have jumped in and helped the student understand before it was submitted, a formative assessment, without doing that, they've submitted this assignment possibly that is completely off base, and it's submitted. That's the summative assessment. And a good way to remember formative versus summative is the sum part of summative, sum final. So that's the, you know, the final one, whereas the formative one is the one that's ongoing. All right, let's look at another example. So swim lessons. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten my sea legs about me yet, but I hear this is kind of how it goes, so I'm going to kind of roll with it. So there's like different stages in terms of like learning how to swim. There's like I used to work at a YMCA, and there's like a guppy type of like classes, and then you pass that, and then you get to like minnows, and then you kind of course, the fish get bigger. The kind of more the difficulty goes up as you kind of check off certain competencies. If there weren't these formative assessments, these kind of checkpoints put in there, and you just put a kid at, let's just say, shark level, you run the risk of, you know, harm, or the student not having met those competencies to be able to, I don't know, blow bubbles or to float on their back or whatever those prerequisite competencies are so that the student can go from being a guppy to being a shark or whatever, a barracuda, whatever the highest level is. So again, having these checkpoints, formative assessments, are really important, especially for safety in this case, to ensure that our student, our kids are on the right track toward being able to matriculate toward being a shark. And then the last example, college advising. So typically at every university, you're assigned an advisor who checks in with, or who should check in with you periodically to talk about your progress toward earning your degree. Those check-ins are formative, right? As you go along, after your first year, after your second year, or whenever the sequencing could be, they check in with you. The risk of not having any summatives, or I'm sorry, any formatives, is that you think you're on track to graduate, you think you've got it all together, and heck, you might, but perhaps you didn't, I don't know, keep in mind this particular requirement for your major that you forgot about, or they could have changed the requirements somehow to add a certain course or some kind of, I don't know, non-curricular requirement. So you think you're on track to graduate, but you didn't meet with your advisor to kind of get feedback as you go along. And so that results in a pretty disgruntled, college student 4 years down the road when they're being told, oh, you didn't meet this requirement, which is why often many schools will kind of put holds on students' accounts so that you can't register for classes without getting advised. That's kind of, I guess it's a forced formative assessment to make sure that our college students in this case are actually making adequate progress, and that if there are any concerns or amendments, they're aware of those, and then the advisor typically documents that they told the student about those modifications. So hopefully those examples kind of make the difference between summative and formative a bit more clear, and kind of understanding why it's important that we intersperse those throughout. I would hate for us, like as school personnel or really just people working with youth, to give this elaborate, great lesson on empathy or test taking strategies, and you take all this time to walk them through it, and then you have no summative assessments in there. I'm sorry, no formative assessment, no benchmarks. And then you're like, all right, take this test, show me what you know. And then you get it back and it's like, this is way off. They didn't get the learning objectives that I set out for them were nowhere near met. So that's kind of the risk that you run by not ensuring that your students are following along with you and developing some pretty intuitive or kind of commonsensical, if you will, a summative and formative assessment techniques. And this kind of reiterates some of the aspects of formative assessments. So getting some feedback, helping our learners even to better understand gaps in what they understand or what they may not fully understand. And even, of course, it helps you as the youth leader or someone working with kids to better understand, maybe, are these gaps kind of more so one or two students, or is it pretty much all of our students who don't quite have an understanding on this topic? So finding ways, really quick ways to assess understanding and learning, I think is really important. So we've kind of been bouncing back and forth between summative, so I may not need to necessarily go through these next couple of ones in as much depth. So of course, these are your cumulative strategies. They're typically graded. Of course, I would think that we don't, in our line of work, maybe giving grades isn't quite as applicable, but more so in a teaching realm, a test, an examination, and end of the year standardized test for writing or for math, whatever have you. And typically what you'll see in the academic sense is that there are these these formative assessments, benchmarks, if you will, interspersed throughout the school year, which culminate in this summative assessment of an end of the year assessment. So the benchmarks are designed to give the teacher in the school an understanding as far as are our students following along. And a lot of the schools I worked at, we had 4 9-week kind of intervals, if you will. So at the end of every 9 weeks, there'd be all these assessments administered to students, science, history, etc. And then the teachers would use that data to inform which kids need more support, which kids got it, which kids are kind of on the bubble, and they could adjust their intervention that way versus having no formative assessments in there and just letting it rip at the end of the year and crossing your fingers that the students got it, which some may have it, but perhaps some may not be as far along as you hope they would have been. So we've kind of laid the groundwork. Hopefully the summative versus formative kind of breakdown is a bit clearer, and hopefully the images help to make that even clearer as well. So let's get to the feature presentation, right? So we talked about formative, talked about summative. What are some things I can do today or tomorrow or whenever to assess student understanding summatively and formatively? And so we're going to spend the rest of our time discussing a couple of ideas. And of course, you all have a copy of the PowerPoint, and I'll give you my information, so you can certainly reach out to me if you want some more ideas, or if you want to kind of brainstorm some ways to maybe for your students or for your particular profession, ways to assess, because some of this may not exactly be a tit for tat for whatever profession you may be involved in. All right, let's get to it. So I always find that before jumping into assessing and really to help to create an environment that's conducive to like understanding each other and knowing expectations, working together to establish some group norms and expectations, ground rules, or sometimes what it's referred to, is really important. And so perhaps before, like at the beginning, when you're working with the group, perhaps for the first time, or maybe very early on in your time with them, work together to co-create expectations. People are more likely to follow rules that they had a role in helping to create. Now, perhaps you have a couple of kind of mandatory ones that you come up with. For example, keep your hands and feet to yourself. Ask for permission from a group leader before, I don't know, leaving the building, or something like, health and safety wise. Of course, you want to make sure that those rules are very clear for our participants. So similarly, you want to work with your students, maybe have them go in small groups, for example, to come up with some possible ground rules, and then come back to the table or to the room as a community, a group, and discuss those and come up with some expectations and roles. And perhaps you can check in maybe a few weeks later to see, are we still meeting these rules that we collaboratively came up with a few weeks ago? So I guess having some formative assessments of, the ground rules interspersed throughout your time together. Another important, I guess, rule of thumb when you're coming up with rules, the research shows that people are more, I always get this mixed up in saying it, but people are more likely to follow do requests than don't requests. So you don't want to put on your list like don't run, don't hit people, don't yell in the hallway. You want to focus on what they should be doing and not what you don't want them to do. So maybe keep your hands and feet to yourself. Walk quietly in the hallway. I don't know, share your I don't know, pencils or whatever. You kind of get the point there. So we're not talking about what we don't want them to do. We want to focus on what we want them to do, kind of the positive, more healthy and pro-social behaviors, if that makes sense. So again, I think the ground rules, starting with that, lays a pretty solid framework for moving forward. So this is one of my favorite formative assessment techniques. And so it's called Fistify. And it's a great way, as you're teaching something or helping students understand a concept, to see, are they getting it or are they not? Are they kind of in the middle? Where are the students at? Where are the students at? So let's say like you're talking about a topic, you're talking, and before you go on to the next segment, you want to see, I don't know, do they understand like what bullying is and what it isn't, and how they are similar and different? And so you may say, all right, we talked about bullying, Fistify, show me where you're at in terms of understanding these topics. And so you have your students, they'll use like the picture suggests, they'll put their fingers up to kind of demonstrate their understanding of a topic, with the 1 being I don't really understand at all, and a 5 being I got it and I can tell my neighbor to my left or to your left, my right, how to do this, or what the difference between bullying is and mean behavior is. Or I can tell my neighbor uh, what it means to be a bully versus what it means to be mean. So again, really easy. You can do this even today if you're working with kids, for example, and I found that the students really enjoy being interactive and finding ways to show their level of understanding. And so you as the group leader, you can better understand, do I see a lot of 5s? Do I see some 2s? Do I see some 1.5s, perhaps? And that can inform, okay, I don't think that they fully grasp this concept of bullying and what it is and what it's not, like what's teasing versus what's bullying. Let me go back and maybe a bit more slower, talk about these differences, or maybe that signals I need to have a formative assessment in between when I put that checkpoint, the one in which the students express not really understanding. So perhaps my checkpoint should go even earlier than when I just did it. So perhaps the one where the students were confused, that you asked them, can you tell me 3 characteristics of bullying? And you see a lot of 1s and 2s, perhaps that would inform you, okay, let me just focus on 1. Like, do you understand 1 of them? And then you can kind of use that to maybe widen the gap in terms of your formative assessments, or maybe even make those a bit shorter to kind of ensure that your students are following along with you as you go. So Fistify, very simple. Kids can pick it up very quickly, and it's not really that difficult to administer I find. Let's discuss another one. So we talked about the Fistify, where they can show their understanding, using, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another simple one is, do you understand? Yes, no, or maybe. So they can do a thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in between. And similarly, it gives you on the spot data. Do they understand this concept of bullying, if you will? You could even have like certain questions, like maybe you have true or false questions or something about bullying, and you kind of have them respond that way. So I think that's true. I think it's false. I'm not really sure about that. Dr. Bolden, can you kind of walk through that one more time so I can kind of have a better understanding about bullying? So that's kind of one way you can use this kind of rule of thumb. Just show me with your thumbs to agree, disagree, or kind of in the middle. And then you can kind of use that again to inform your next steps, and also to better understand if your students are following along. Some more levity for you all. So one of the great features about, all of us being remote and getting accustomed to platforms such as this one and such as Zoom is that we've, I guess, by force, have to learn more about their functionalities. And so I remember when I was teaching the assessment class to our master's students here at WVU, a cool feature was that they could private message me their responses. So like I would ask them a question about percentile ranks, for example, and perhaps some students are a bit apprehensive about giving an honest response to all 24 of their peers. Well, they can private message me through those virtual platforms, and I can see individually what their responses are. So you can still get data, but perhaps sometimes you may have a student or students who are a bit hesitant to respond, or who may kind of go with the flow when you're asking a question. So by having that private interface, you're more likely to get a response that's authentic and a response that lets you know if students are getting it or not. And so when I do that, of course, I had 20 something students in the class, so I couldn't go, tit for tat through every single response, but I kind of would comb through and kind of get an idea as far as, are they getting these percentile ranks and these norm reference scores? Do they understand what they mean? You can kind of on the spot get some understanding as far as where the class is at. So if your profession, your company, your agency has that, you may want to think about when you're doing these formative assessments, having a chance for students to private message you to kind of get rid of the angst as far as being wrong or maybe feeling embarrassed because you're not quite on the mark. All right, let's talk through a couple of additional formative and summative assessment ideas. And so another tried and true method is called the think, pair, share idea. And so the way it works is maybe you pose some kind of question to your audience or to your youth with whom you work. And so you'll give them some time to think to themselves about the question as far as their thoughts, their reactions, or how they may respond. Then they get into small groups, maybe 2 or 3, or depending on how big the group is, it could be more than that. And they talk about it in small groups to kind of confirm maybe their thoughts or to get some additional perspectives as far as possible responses. And then after the pair part, you come back to a large group with the entire class and you have some sharing out, if you will. And so this is, I think, a great way for students to speak with each other. So I think engagement and being interactive tends to be the way that kids like, instruction or lessons, if you will. But also a cool thing about this, a way we can get some good formative data. So when the students are in groups, we can walk around as group leaders, as school counselors, and kind of have our ear to the ground as far as what students are talking about. As a matter of fact, when I was a school counselor, I would do the think, pair, share, give them some time to kind of talk about it in the small groups for a couple of minutes, kind of bounce around and I would stop at a table and say, hey, y'all, let's hear some thoughts. What are you all thinking as far as this bullying concept? I use this as a kind of constant example here. And then they would say, they were thinking about this, that, and the third, and the fourth. And I would typically start with, if they were a bit off, I would typically start, oh, that sounds great. I love those ideas. You may want to think about this idea. So you're on the right track with this, but I talked a bit about X, Y, and Z. So I think you all should talk more about that and consider how this aspect may play into that. But you're on the right track, but just kind of think about this topic that was discussed. So that gives you a chance as they're talking about it, formative, to check in and to see where they're at and to hopefully clarify some concepts that could be unclear to participants. And also it prevents students from sharing ideas that are way in left field because you've kind of jumped in and gave some feedback as far as their understanding of a topic and help them to get back on course if in fact they are a little off in their thinking. So think, pair, share, I think it's kind of pretty standard at this point. Even universities use that. So, but it's a great way for kids to engage with each other and also to get some feedback as far as, are they getting it on their own, or do they need kind of some training wheels or some help from me to better grasp these concepts? In the video I was going to show was just kind of showing you how a teacher monitors the classroom and checks in with students and with groups to kind of see what their thoughts were. And she kind of gave them feedback as far as, you're on the right track, but think about this topic and how that may apply to bullying, for example. So here is a summative example. So at the very end, something you could do, there's sometimes called exit tickets, and especially in school counseling land. So you have what's called sometimes a 3, 2, 1, if you will. And so the way it works is you have, you've given your formative assessments, you've given the lesson, and now you want to see what students understand and what they don't understand. And so it could be this template, it could be you have them take out a piece of paper and then number 1 or number 3, number 2, number 1, and use that. So you don't have to use this exact template, but just kind of the structure I think is a bit more intuitive. So 3 things you learned, 2 things you found interesting, and 1 question you have. So the 3 kind of helps you to see, okay, I talked about bullying for the past 45 minutes. Did the pieces that I wanted to stick, did those stick? Or did some of the kind of secondary aspects of it stick? And again, that kind of helps you to understand ways to maybe go back and to clarify different topics that may not have stuck like you wanted them to stick. So again, this is a summative assessment at the very end of a lesson or a topic. And you can go and look through these and kind of see where are students at and their understanding of whatever topic it was, such as bullying. And so there's different modifications of this too. So while it does say 3, 2, 1, like for example, perhaps having like a first grader do this could be a bit intensive for some. Perhaps maybe you do, I don't know, 2, 1, 1. 2 things you learned, 1 thing interesting, and 1 question you have, or some modification. So you can definitely tweak it toward your particular age group. If you want to keep it 3, 2, 1, of course, that's fine. If you want to make modifications, that works as well. But again, you're getting data as far as our students understanding it. Am I being clear? Did my summative assessment, did my formative assessments, the checkpoints, were those helpful? And did that lead the class for the most part toward being able to have the key takeaways that I wanted them to take away from our time together? Okay. So I know this is very tough to read, but this is another summative assessment example. So it's clearest point and muddiest point. So what was the most confusing point? And I think I got the wrong template, but you kind of get the idea. So what was the muddiest point and what was the clearest point from today's presentation? So whereas this one is 3, 2, 1, this is kind of like 1, 1, if you will. So one thing that was maybe unclear, that was tough to understand, whereas, and you have your thing that was a bit clear from today's presentation or the activity, the lesson, or what have you. So if you're trying to like maybe hone in on the importance of being resilient and trying your best, maybe this is something you could, for example, administer to your students or have them to talk about even to better understand if they took anything from your time together discussing resilience and kind of bouncing back from setbacks. So this is a KWL chart. So it stands for know, well, this says wonder, but it can also stand for want to know and learned. And this can be really great feedback and a way to assess the individuals, the students, grow in terms of their understanding of a topic. So at the beginning, I mean, this is based on reading, but it can be applied in this sense as well. So what do you know about bullying? Write down as much that you know as far as bullying is concerned. What do you want to know about bullying? Some kids may put nothing, being pragmatic here, but some may have some questions as far as bullying is concerned. And then you'll give the presentation, you'll give the activity. Okay, so we talked about bullying for the past 45 minutes. Take out your KWL chart and tell me some things that you learned from our time together about bullying. So you can see if they got something out of it, and it's a bit more open-ended, if you will. You may even give them some prompts like, think about 3 things you learned from today's presentation to kind of give them some guardrails so that they don't kind of leave this blank, if you will. So this is another kind of tried and true way to get data from your participants, and then to assess, did they learn something and did they take away the key points that you wanted to be taken away. And then before we get to kind of wrapping up, a couple of additional ways to get data. And this could depend because some schools have different like security parameters that may or may not give you permission as a teacher or an after school professional or worker to utilize these. But Kahoot and Poll Everywhere are great ways to get some formative and even summative assessments. And these are both virtual platforms that students or even my college students enjoy. I did Kahoot earlier today with them as we concluded our course. And so being able, so Kahoot gamifies the learning process, if you will. So they can compete against each other to demonstrate their understanding of a topic. And both of these are completely free, my favorite words. So they'll use a device, a phone or a computer, for example, and they can compete against each other by answering certain questions about bullying, for example. And the kids get into it. My graduate students get into it. It gets to be quite spirited, and I see a lot of Tiger Woods like yes, like when they get it right, and when they get first place on the podium that comes up at the very end. Both of these are very free, and they can give you they're free, and they can give you some great on the spot data, especially poll everywhere, as far as your students' level of understanding of whatever topic you're discussing. So again, just a couple of formative assessments, summative assessments. All of these are located in the PowerPoint that's available for you all in the GoToWebinar platform. So feel free to check those out and utilize those and find ways to maybe even modify those toward your profession and the way in which you work with youth. So a few parting comments before we have some Q&A. So I talked a bit about how my approach with kind of redirecting students was try to point out something that they're doing well or that's going a little better, even if they are kind of a bit off. Start with that and then find a way to tactfully redirect, if you will, and to tactfully help them to get back on track. So I think you're on the right track here. Let me kind of help you with this aspect. Let's talk a bit more about that component. I found that when students feel like, they're recognized for putting forth effort and trying to do it, that tends to open them up a bit to being more, to receiving redirection and not maybe being as hesitant to take in that feedback. You also want to encourage students to be encouraging and convey that growth is a part of the learning process. And you want to also determine your learning outcomes proactively. So before you give your lesson on bullying, what are some learning objectives that you want your students to take away before they conclude or by the time you conclude your lesson? That way you can gear your, you can kind of understand what you're looking for when you're doing 3, 2, 1, or when you're doing the clearest point and the muddiest point, because you want to make sure that you have an established criteria and that you're able to examine their responses to see, did that criteria get met or did it not get met? So that is all I have for you all this morning / afternoon. I'm more than willing to take any questions at this time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We've got a few minutes here for questions. So again, feel free to type those into the questions box and then we can go through them here yet. I really appreciate your discussion of formative assessment because so many times with the evaluation, I feel like, even that summative, sometimes we get to the end of our activity and we think, oh shoot, I should assess something. So I think focusing on that formative kind of gets your mind thinking about, all right, I need to think about the process as well as the end. So yeah, I thought that was great. Also, I think maybe a tendency for some of us is to look at maybe even summative assessment sometimes as how much did people like the activity? Did they enjoy it? Was it, satisfying or were they engaged? And so I think I've seen it before where even the summative assessment was just how much did you like this event? And maybe we didn't get to the true impact. I'm wondering if you would recommend still asking those satisfaction questions or those engagement questions. Do they still have a place within assessment?
I would say absolutely to that. So I think that there's a correlation perhaps between students' enjoyment of a lesson, how you deliver it, and maybe even how much they get out of it. So perhaps they may tune you out if it's just kind of really dry or maybe perceived as being dry and not engaging. Whereas if they actually feel like they're enjoying it, it makes sense, they feel like a part of it, that may be more conducive, won't guarantee, but it may be more conducive to actually picking up on certain aspects, being involved in the process and the learning process. So I think that having a couple of, and I did this as a school counselor, a couple of like questions about was it enjoyable, and obviously making it age appropriate. So perhaps if you're having I don't know, like a first grader, like you work with first graders and you have a summative assessment, you may have like some emojis, for example, or like a smiley face, a kind of sideways face, and a frowny face, and you have the student color in, or you have them circle the one that most applies to the lesson. And of course, you would then you would modify the wording to be age appropriate too. So maybe for the first grader, I had fun. I learned something. Very simple, thinking about their reading levels developmentally as well. I think there's room for those kind of getting to the meat as far as, did they learn or were those learning objectives met? I think there's also an important aspect in terms of ensuring or trying to, as much as possible, make it as engaging. And then perhaps engaging to the 28 of us may differ from what's fun or engaging to a fifth grader, for example. So I think that there's room to do both in terms of having the learning objectives aspect and having the engagement and the fun, if you will, aspect as well. Both of those which can inform how you go about delivering the content, since sometimes if it isn't really fun, that can impact how willing your student is to engage in it, and that could somehow inform how much they actually take away from your conversation on bullying or about being resilient or about what it means to be a good friend.
Thank you. Um, I'm also wondering if you shared some great examples. Is there any, websites that you really like as far as some ideas for different assessments, or any, other resources that maybe your kind of go-to in terms of finding some assessments? That usually tends to be my issue too, of, oh, where are they? What can I do?
Yeah, like a lot of like taking my profession as a counselor, we do a lot of borrowing from our teachers and from fellow educators as well. And of course, borrowing and trying to adapt them to what we do. So typically school counselors or school-based personnel don't grade students or like from history or whatever, but we can use those tools to better understand their level of understanding a certain topic. So I think that like there's like if you literally you can Google formative and summative assessment strategies and you'll see a bunch of images come up. You'll see like there's a bunch of teachers pay teachers type of materials that of course typically cost money, but you'll probably see a lot of wonderful resources as far as ways to go about admin or different creative, formative, and summative assessment techniques. Another resource that I often use is called Cult of Pedagogy. And I can't think of the person who's kind of the guru behind it, but they have tons of wonderful resources, not just about formative and summative assessments, but they have this wonderful like repository of different discussion techniques. And I've used those quite frequently in my work as a professor in terms of how to make the discussions a bit more engaging. So literally, if you type in the Google Cult of Pedagogy discussion techniques, you'll see this long litany of ideas. And I think it's written very nicely and very clearly in a way that is you want to actually read it. You see some different ways to kind of elicit discussion. And then you can maybe even intersperse some formative assessment by walking around, checking in on what they're talking about. And if students are maybe a bit off in terms of their understanding, getting them back on track, which is one of the intents of having those formative assessments.
Wonderful. Well, I don't see any questions in our questions box, so we will sign off here. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bolden, for sharing all of your tips. Your email address is there, so if anybody on the call wants to check in or has some other questions, I'm sure he'd be very willing to talk about assessment because it can be exciting. Thank you so much, everyone. Please take a few moments to fill out that survey. It's our formative assessment, so please help us out, give us some ideas for next time. Thank you so much and have a great day.